Hello and welcome to the first video from Hurdu Scenics. My name is Victor, and in this video I'm going to teach you how to get from this unpainted plaster rock to a much more realistically looking version of it like this one. Most of the realism will be achieved through paints, so we're gonna need a black paint, a white, and a yellow. Those are the minimum necessary colors in order to achieve the realistic effect. We're gonna also consider using some grays, but if you don't have them, you can always achieve them by mixing black and white in various quantities. However, if you have access to grays, you can use similar grays to mine. I used a gray called Pavement, which is a very dark gray. We want another gray that's a bit lighter than that, and that's a medium gray. And then finally a very light gray, like the slate gray. Finally, if you have a green, that would be useful because that will allow us to achieve the final finishes and give that ultra realistic look. Before we begin painting, there is one more thing that we need to do. We need to make this rock look less pristine. It shouldn't look just like it came out of the mold. And also in this process, we're going to try to remove any imperfections from the molding process. My rock here, I'm going to show you on the video in a bit, has some bubbles, air bubbles from the plaster. I failed to remove those. So in this process we're going to try to remove them and also make the rock look a bit more worn out, just like it's been outside for a very long time and it has endured a lot of elements. You can see here there are some bubbles, there are some markings from the molding process, so we're gonna try to remove them. Take advantage of the fact that nature is not perfect, so there is no prescribed process for doing this. What I'm going to try is probably try to go with this diagonal lines, something like that maybe. I'm gonna try to do a few parallel diagonal lines and I'm gonna see how it looks like. Basically, I'm just gonna start cutting through and I'm gonna do this until I think it looks good. When you do it on your own, just try to make it look good to you, and remember there's no perfect process and nature is not perfect, so whatever you do, it will probably look extremely realistic. Just make sure you don't skip this step because nature doesn't have perfect rocks, or there are very few of those, so it's gonna be much easier if you do that right now. Alright, I'm going to keep doing this for a few minutes and then I'm gonna come back and show you the result. I think I'm getting there. The rock looks pretty good. I'm happy with the result and I think I'm going to stop now. The rock looks pretty good. It has a few nice cuts on it and I think I'm ready to start painting it. So let's do that. Alright, we are ready to start painting. We're going to use the pavement color or the darkest gray that you have. You can even use black. And the goal of this step is to cover the plaster with a base color. Just make sure every single white part of that rock is covered with a dark gray. Alright, I think I'm very happy with how the base layer looks like. Next thing, I'm going to let this rock dry for about an hour because I want the paint to be fully dry before applying the next layer. So I'm going to turn off the video right now and I will see you in a few minutes. It's been about an hour. The paint is now dry. Notice how it got darker than when it was wet. That's the case with most acrylic paints. They will get less bright when the water dries out. For the next step, we are going to use the sponge. I cut a small part of this sponge that I have here make sure it is dry. And then for paint, we are going to use a lighter gray than the one that we used for the base. In this case, I'm going to use the medium gray. The goal here is to get the paint onto the rock using the sponge. But what we're trying to do is not cover the base fully, but rather using a bit of paint on the sponge, we're gonna tap it over the rock to get these like spots or patterns. We want to cover quite a lot of the base, but we still want some of that base color to be visible. This is again one of those steps that takes a bit. Just make sure that you get paint every now and then, add more, and don't worry if the color looks too intense. Remember, colors will get less intense as the water dries out. So I'm going to speed up the video and then I'm going to come back when I'm done with this. Because of the shape of this rock, I have a few areas that are really hard to reach with the sponge. So what I'm thinking about doing is maybe using the brush to get in there. It's kind of difficult to get with a sponge. So I'm going to do the similar thing. I'm going to get a bit of paint on the brush, not too much, and just try to get into those hard to reach areas. Just going to slowly tap. Technically you could do this on the entire rock face without using a sponge. I prefer a sponge because it gives a bit more uneven patterns and it looks a bit more realistic. Brushes are a bit too even. Alright, I think I'm pretty happy with how this looks like. Again, we're gonna let it dry a bit and then we are going to apply the next layer of paint. It's been about 30 minutes. The rock already looks pretty good. Notice there are multiple shades of gray on it right now. Probably you can stop here if you prefer, but I like to apply an even lighter layer of gray, so we're gonna use the slate gray or the lightest gray that you have. Probably you could even use white, maybe white with a bit of black. But this step is very straightforward. We're gonna do the same thing as before, and we're gonna use a different gray, the sponge, and just tap with the sponge and paint over the rock. I like how the gray looks like at this point, but there is one trick that I learned from, I don't know where, somewhere on the internet. If you apply a bit of yellow in your gray, you're gonna get an even more realistic look. So what I'm going to do here is mix the gray with the yellow in order to get this grayish yellow or yellowish gray, however you want to call it. Don't worry if you put too much yellow. It's not too much ever. Just don't put probably pure yellow. What you're looking for is a color similar to this one. And we're gonna do the same technique as before, the sponge and paint and tap it over. Don't go as much as with the previous color, just do certain areas, not everywhere. And with every layer that you do with the sponge, you want to put less paint than on the layer before. So I'm gonna keep doing this for another minute or so, and then we're going to see the result. I am quite happy with how the rock turned out. You could probably stop here and you're gonna have a gorgeous rock, but I want to do one more thing before we are done with this. So we are done with the sponge, but we're going to do a few highlights now, and we're gonna add a few more nature colors on this piece. So I'm gonna let it dry and then I'm gonna come back. After looking at this dry rock, I was not happy with the amount of yellow that I've put on. I think I've done too much. So I'm going to show you a technique on how to fix that. It's actually trivial. Notice there are some yellows there that maybe I put too much. Anyway, I'm going to take some of that base coat and I'm going to repeat the sponge technique, this time with very little paint and only in certain areas. So dip in, get some of that base color, and then apply it over the areas that you think are too yellow or too light. And keep doing this for a bit. You don't have to do it. I'm just doing it because I think I've overdone the white and the yellow. It's been about 45 minutes now. The paint is dry and we can take a look at almost the final result. What we have here, you can see all the yellows, the whites, the grays, different shades of gray. You can see the cuts in the rock, all those holes and effects from the elements. It looks really good. So we're done with the sponge, and for the next step we're gonna use some white paint and the brush. We just need a bit of paint. I'm gonna try to put as little as possible there. And using a brush, we're gonna dip the brush in, and the technique is called dry brushing because we are trying to get as little paint as possible on this brush. So whatever paint you get there, make sure you clean it on a piece of paper or a paper towel or something. Make sure there is almost no paint left there. The goal is not to turn the rock white. The goal is to highlight all those edges and cuts and anything that you want to make stand out. So using a brush that's almost dry, run the brush over any area that you want to be highlighted. For example, this cut here. Notice how everything gets highlighted there. Try not to overdo it. Don't make the rock too white, but try to highlight all those edges and basically anything that has sharper angle benefits from dry brushing. We're gonna try to go over some of these cuts. Oops, I put too much paint there. It's okay. We can always live with that. It's not the end of the world. If you do too much, remember you can always go with a sponge and a bit of that base color. But look at that. Look how realistic it is. It looks amazing. I'm going to speed up the video here because all I'm doing is highlighting edges, but I will see you in a bit. Alright, I think this rock looks excellent right now. I think I'm gonna stop dry brushing and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. If you want, you can just stop here, but if you want to take it to the next level, I'm gonna show you a technique that will make it look extremely realistic. Alright, we are at the final part of this tutorial. We're going to do some wet brushing right now. We're gonna use some black and some greens and a lot of water. So we're gonna start by applying the colors on the palette. Make sure the colors are mixed well. And then we're gonna use a large brush and some water. the goal here is really to get a lot of dark water. You don't want too much paint, you just want a lot of water. We're trying to simulate what happens with a rock in nature. It gets rained on, then that rain mixed with dust and various other particles gets dry, so it's gonna stick to the rock once the water evaporates or dries out. So we're just gonna tap the rock with the wet water, and we're gonna keep doing this for a bit. Don't worry too much. It's kind of a messy process. Sometimes it pours on you like you see here, but just keep doing it. Make sure you highlight those top parts and also get in any crevices or cuts that you want to highlight. We're gonna do a similar thing then with the green, but first let's finish this black. Okay, I think it looks pretty decent now. Yeah, let's try the green. The green will help with getting a bit of that moss or green that you see appearing after water has been present for a long time. So highlight those areas where rain would kind of fall over, you know, the tops and any sort of valley shaped piece. That's where you want the green to be. So do the same thing, and if at any point you put too much green, don't worry, or too much black, just use a paper towel and remove the excess water. Alright, I'm going to apply the final layer of green, and I think we are done here. Yeah, it looks really good. I'm just gonna dry some of that water, and look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? We're gonna let it dry for maybe 30 minutes or so, and then I'm going to show you the final result. Alright, we are done. It's been a very fun video to make, and here is the final result. It looks so good. Look at how realistic it is. You can see all those yellows and greens and different shades of gray. You can even see some of that base color there and all the cuts. I'm pretty happy with how this rock turned out. If you are interested in seeing more of the models that I make, or you are interested in buying this thing, I'm actually selling it on my Etsy store. Check the description section for a link to it, or if you want to type it, it is hoordooscenics.etsy.com. That's HOORDOO scenics.com .etsy.com. You can find this model and a few others. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Feel free to leave a comment if you find this useful, or if you have any feedback or suggestions. Take care.